he's still developing, but he indicated he had a theme to me that he thought he might present, and I kind of hope he does. It sounded quite interesting. But I'm not going to tell you what it is, because sure as I do, he'll change his mind and do something else. That's his prerogative. So this morning, I shall endeavor to cover or address 2nd and 3rd John. Sounds like a big undertaking, huh? 2nd and 3rd John. Well, they're not really letters like the first one was. These are more like postcards. 2nd and 3rd John, each one is more like a little postcard. And maybe we can address those both this morning, and that be okay. 2 John chapter 1, beginning at verse 1. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. Who is the elect and her children? The church. Maybe so. I think a church, a congregation that may have been local, or that he was familiar with, or perhaps established, or had spent some time with, felt very close to. And this may sound like an unusual address, but you know how things through years get watered down, but we talk about other congregations, sometimes we talk about sister congregations. Well, maybe it started with this idea that to the elect lady and her children would be maybe the members of that congregation, to the congregation at whole and to the individual members. Whom I love in truth. This one's about truth. This postcard is about truth and love. We'll look at that a little bit. He says, I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. Well, that sort of tips me off right there. Some of your children are walking in truth. And that means what? Some are not. I'm glad to hear that some of your children are walking in truth. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I'm writing you a new commandment, but the one we've had from the beginning, that we love one another. Is he beating a dead horse to death again? Has John said all there is to say about love? Was there any need for John to say anything after Paul wrote about love? Not only in 1 Corinthians, but in other places. Peter did as well. John is bearing down on this theme of let's love, not a new commandment. We've had this commandment from the beginning, love each other. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. Somehow, the wording here wakes me up to a different perspective on, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. If you love the Lord, you'll do what he says. This is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you've heard from the beginning, so that you walk in it. This is becoming an admonition here, and maybe it was in 1 John and I didn't see it so clearly, but it seems to be here. The great affection and love that you have for the brethren might not should be extended to just everybody who calls themselves a Christian. It should be reserved for those who obey the commandments, who love the Lord and obey all his commandments. Many deceivers have gone out into the world. Those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh, such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in his teaching has both God and the Father. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Now, I must admit that throughout my life I've read this as, them evil, wicked, false teachers. They just as well be wearing a sign saying, false teacher. I'm supposed to be able to recognize them. But that's not always the case. Paul wrote to the Ephesians, grievous wolves will come in from among you. People you have always loved and trusted. People who other Christians might say is somebody to listen to may come in and you be gathered together in great numbers and in great enthusiasm because we're having a big revival and this big name preacher is going to come. And if he says things that aren't right, he says, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. This sounds awfully close to withdrawing fellowship. I should turn down a thumb here. I guess that's the expression, isn't it? Turn down a thumb, turn down a page, put down a marker, drive down a peg, enter any others. Make a point here. Withdrawing fellowship is not kicking somebody out of the church. You don't have the authority to do that. God adds people to the church, and you hadn't got the authority to override that. God will judge, but when one misbehaves and won't repent, people are to go to him or her or them and say, here's the issue. Here's the problem. And talk through and say, in the end, this can't stand. You need to correct this. You need to stop doing this and correct this if you are to continue with us. And if they don't, then more go and talk. This is a somewhat slow and deliberate process, but one done in earnest and with some urgency. It's not to be allowed to just drag on and on. And if one still will not repent, then the church is to withdraw fellowship. And the withdrawing of fellowship is not to eat with such a one or to have any other kind of social activity that promotes fellowship, but that the only interactions would be to talk about this issue and this problem and to seek correction on it. And this is all to be done in love. You're trying to correct a behavior, to change, to cause someone to come back and quit doing that which is wrong, to see that it's wrong, to quit it, to repent of it, and to be sorry for what it has done or the anguish and concern it's caused the congregation and the blemish it's brought on the congregation in the name of God. Most churches would have difficulty doing this. Not only because it's something you don't want to have to face, but because there's not enough fellowship to withdraw. Does that make sense? Fellowship is more than, I'm going way past what I intended to, but it seems fellowship is way past sitting in this nice auditorium on Sunday mornings together, greeting each other, saying fine how do you do's, giving some hugs, some warm handshakes, and going about our way. I can do that going to the movies. Way back when the movie Titanic came out, I took my daughters and a couple of their cousins, and we went to the movies. Well, one of those poor girls was there to enjoy a great movie, and she fell in love with the romance part of the story. And when DiCaprio died, why, you'd have thought she sank on the Titanic. She went to boo-hooing and would not be consoled. And when the movie was over and all the credits rolled by, we couldn't leave. She was in distress. People we didn't know were coming by and trying to bring comfort to her. She was about 14 or 15, right at that age, and whoo, this was an awful thing. She may have gotten more concern and affection from people who were concerned about her than she might have gotten at church the previous Sunday or the following Sunday. I'm saying because we come and sit here together, that doesn't necessarily constitute fellowship. There's got to be more to it. The fellowship is not just that we are together, but we're together in purpose. That we're together because of a common belief and faith. Poor old Diane's having a tough time. And it is encouragement to each other and support of each other in that common goal and in that common faith. And included in that is eating together. I have preparation for a lesson on the significance of eating together. And it shows the significance of eating together throughout the Bible and what it meant and how important it was and what it meant to the early church. And how that withdrawing fellowship, they fellowshipped in the eating together so often that if you withdrew fellowship, wouldn't eat with that person, it had some significance. It just put a halt on the whole thing. Nobody would eat if this person came into the fellowship hall and said, I'm here to eat. Nope, we can't eat. We're not going to eat with you. We can talk to you about this. In fact, let's sit down and talk about it. And if the person says, no, I'm here to eat, well, you go ahead. We're not going to eat with you. You know what eating together does? Breaks down barriers like nothing else. It creates a rapport and a relationship like nothing else. I was born and raised for the most part in Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery, Alabama doesn't have the healthiest of reputations when it comes to equal rights. I remember seeing news broadcasts and hearing people talk about, when I was young, blacks were coming into restaurants and eating with white folks. I remember when there was an integration and the white folks were, nope, I'm just going to go without eating all day. What was the big deal about eating? I didn't get it. I get it now. Eating together establishes rapport, brings about fellowship, concern. When you sit down to eat, you talk about things. Got any kids? Got any pets? Let's talk about the pets. I don't want to talk about children because I don't want to tell you about mine. Let's talk about pets. Let's talk about your work. You talk about all kinds of things. You ever had any of you been taken to eat lunch by an insurance salesman? He's not there to buy you lunch because you're a wonderful person. He's there to sell you insurance. I've been taken to lunch. I've been taken to breakfast. I've been taken to the cleaners. Eating together has a significance. You can break down walls. You can break down barriers. You can create a relationship that didn't exist before. Oh, I remember. We had lunch with them. I remember when I was young going to a church where we didn't grow up, in a town where we didn't grow up, and somebody invited us home. I remember who they were and where they lived and everything about it, because we had been invited to lunch at their house. That felt kind of special. When I was young, my grandmother always had a pound cake. You listening? At the ready, because my grandfather was going to bring somebody home from church to eat or to have cake and coffee after church on Sunday night. It was common to invite one another home for lunch on Sunday, or to get together on Saturday and roast wieners together, if nothing else, and let the kids play outside. They were great friends. Those people that my parents had Saturday afternoon suppers with and Sunday night suppers, and I still hold them as dear friends to myself. Guess why? We ate together. We could be running and playing and carrying on like wild Indians, but when it was time and everything was cooked, and what the signal is, somebody put the ice in the cups. Oh, now we're getting close. This is the time. And then we stop our hooping and hollering and running and be still for a minute, and somebody prays. And whoever was praying, it was whose house you were at, and they were thankful for the Allens and for the Russells and for the whoever else happened to be there. Nothing like it. Nothing like it. Sharing. When you read through the Bible, they ate together. When you read in Acts chapter 2, and the church was established, you know what the next few verses talk about and can't stop? They had fellowship. Daily they were fellowshipping. They were in constant fellowship. They fellowshipped and they fellowshipped and they fellowshipped, and they couldn't get enough fellowship. They just kept on fellowshipping. They were glad to be with each other. They were glad to support each other. They were glad to encourage one another. They were glad that they all had the good news and salvation, had been baptized and understood what God was about and what Jesus had come for, and the light had been turned on, and we're the happiest bunch of people in the world. Let's get together and eat again. I tell you what, let's just have a dessert supper. Forget the salads and forget the casseroles. Let's just have a dessert supper. Women said, I've been cooking too much, we're going to have sandwiches. Okay. It doesn't matter. God thought it was so important that he set up for the children of Israel 3 times a year, week-long feast that everybody was supposed to come to and participate in. Didn't matter where you were in the world, you come back here and we're going to have a feast. Why? Because you're God's people and y'all need to get together and know each other and be with each other and encourage one another and support each other, cry for one another, honor one another. A week-long feast because God says, I want my children to get together and eat. How does grandmama show love to her family? She cooks. Of all the things she could do, what she does is she cooks. And here, eat. And I don't care who you are, your grandmama's the best cook there ever was. You like to be nice and talk about how nice your wife's cooking is, but your grandmama's the best cook there ever was. And you are the favored child if when she dies, you get her recipe cards. Not her Betty Crocker books. Those cards where she made up the recipe and wrote it down herself. And it doesn't say a half a teaspoon or a tablespoon. It says a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And it just takes practice. How do I know how much a little bit of this is? Work at it. Make that pie 5 or 6 times until you figure it out. I'll tell you when it's right. Used to at Thanksgiving, where'd you go? If you had to go somewhere, at Grandmama's house. Christmas, where'd you go? Grandmama's house. And when you walked in, there was so much activity in the kitchen and the food and the smell. It was enough to distract you from watching football. I'm going on and on and on about it because that's how important it is. God's people eat together and love each other and support each other and talk to each other. And when we go back here, you know what I like? You never know who's going to be sitting at the table with each other. It's a fruit basket turnover. One time you might think, well, these are friends, and the next time they're all scattered out, and you think, well, maybe they had a falling out. They didn't have a falling out. It just mixes up. Somehow it's whoever gets back there goes and sits down, and the next one sits down with them, and it just fills up that way. It's not by, oh, let's us get over here and huddle up and talk. We don't want everybody else to be. Stanley will come over here if we don't fill this table up. Let's all us get together. It ain't like that. Be careful who you let into your fellowship, John said. Be careful who you let into your fellowship. You let just anybody in whom you haven't examined and talked to, and how do you think that gets done? Not here. Not in the Sunday morning Bible class. Not during our assembly hour. It gets done when we sit down eating. Then we find out who people are. Do you know where he's from? Pick on Charles. He's got kinfolk in California. You know how they are. They're liberal folks. Spend time in California. You know how that goes. You know, be careful now, California. It's important that you know who you're in fellowship with. Does somebody come in here and sit amongst us week after week and you don't know their name, and it's been so long you're embarrassed to ask somebody, who is that? I know when you tell me their name, I'll know a lot about them, but I don't put that name with that face. But I've heard people talk. Oh, and now I'm too embarrassed to ask anybody. Well, we may be in trouble here. No. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. It's incumbent upon us to know who we accepted into our fellowship. And who do we accept? It shouldn't be just anybody who walks in the door and says, I've been a Christian for 40 years, worshiping over at so-and-so, and I want to be with y'all. If somebody doesn't know them and can't testify to that or support that claim or approve that, or somebody better be finding out. Because it matters who we associate with. They must be of the same faith. They must understand the same doctrine of salvation we understand. If they say Jesus didn't come in the flesh, whoa, you're a lucky fellow. We're not going to have to withdraw fellowship from you. We're just not going to accept you into fellowship. We're not going to have to go through the drama of withdrawing fellowship. We're just not going to accept you in the first place. Move along. Or let's talk about this and see why you believe that, and can we change it? It's important. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You'll be obedient. You know what my word is, and you'll know each other. That's why it's so easy for Christians who go to another place where there are Christians to feel at home. When somebody comes in here to visit, what do we ask them? What's the first thing you ask them? Where are you from? Where do you go to church? Do you have a home church? Now, if we all lived in a smaller community, the first thing you ask is, who's your mom and daddy? That's where I used to worship and preach at. Somebody come in, two sisters will round them up real quick, buttonhole them and say, who's your mom and daddy? And then they would know who they were. I'd tell them a whole lot about them. Oh, I know who you are. Let me tell you some stories about your mom and daddy. It's important to know who you have fellowship with and whether they're in the faith or not. And John saying there's many that have gone out who are deceivers, and they don't confess the coming of Jesus in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for. You know, it's that easy to lose what you worked for, worked your whole life for. A little bit could come in and we'd all be gone in a minute. We'd all be led astray. We'd all be characterized by one person. There are churches, congregations, that if I meet somebody who says they're from there, I already have a bad taste in my mouth because of what that church used to be and used to represent. May not anymore, but it used to. And that reputation can stay out there for a long, long time. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you. He wants to come and see them face to face. He wants to have that fellowship with them. 3 John. Who knew? The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, it's a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for those brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. It's a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love for the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. These are people who have come through, strangers. Everybody may not know them, but he's saying, Gaius, is that? Yeah, Gaius, you've met with these people. You've tested them. You've questioned them. And you send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. And this that you do has been testified before the church. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. I can't imagine. I would hate to be this Diotrephes. Because John has written something to the church, but this guy who likes to put himself first does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I'll bring up what he's doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers, and also stops those who want to and puts them out of the church. One man has ruined the church. You got two polar extremes here. Gaius, who welcomes strangers, finds out what they are if they're teaching the word, and encourages them, supports them, and sends them on their way in a manner worthy of God. This other guy doesn't accept anybody. If you don't agree with him on everything he says, he just kicks you out of the church. And he won't even accept a letter from John. Because he doesn't recognize John's authority. He is his own authority. It's not that hard for such a thing to happen in a church. It's not that hard, difficult, or unusual. I've seen churches ruined by a man who as an elder lorded it over the flock and used his authority with a heavy hand. Ruined the church, ruined the good name of the church, ruined the fellowship, ruined the happiness, the peacefulness, the unity. It can happen here's a church where it did happen, and John's pointing it out and says, these are the people. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whatever does good is from God. Whatever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone, and from the truth itself we also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had much to write to you, but I'd rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon. We'll talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends each by name. And just like that, 2 nice postcards have been sent, delivered, and read. And as is uncharacteristic, I'm through ahead of time, unless you have comments, questions, or wish to have something discussed or clarified. Oh no.
So, John writing this first epistle, is he writing this for the church in general?
I think he has a particular church in mind. It's not, we can't tell whether he had church generally or a specific congregation. The third John is easier to see because he's talking to particular people at a particular congregation. But it has sort of the same flavor as 2 John. I'm sensing from what he said from 1 John, 2nd, and 3rd John that he's addressing a problem that's running through the churches. So the 2nd John could be at large or to a specific congregation. Do you have a thought on it? Do you have a thought on it?
No, I'm just curious.
Well, I think you said before that we tend to talk about sister churches, and at the end when he says the children of via the sister, I think that does say he's speaking to a specific
Congregation that he,
yeah. And from another specific congregation.
That's kind of the way I've taken it, based on the same thing, that it has that flavor about it, but it doesn't say specifically. It's unlike when John wrote to the 7 churches of Asia and spelled them out. This doesn't have that specificity to it. I don't get to use that word every day. I like to throw it in every now and then. Yes, ma'am?
I'm just reading here in my study Bible, and it says this is either a figurative reference to a church community or a literal reference to a specific person.
Oh, a specific person even.
Several arguments favor the figurative meaning and several favor the literal.
Yeah.
In the defense of the figurative, the issues addressed seem to reflect the problems faced by a church more so than an individual.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am? Well, and that's kind of what I was trying to do this morning is we don't, let me back up that stutter stepping I was doing right there and start with this. Have you ever noticed that the letters written by Paul and the others are not full of praise? They're full of admonitions, pointing out issues and problems that need attention, that need to be corrected, that need to be straightened out. We're silly to think that everything is peaceful and lovely and wonderful in La La Land. If we are a church of Christ trying to do, we probably got problems. Maybe we're not talking about them. Maybe we're not bringing them up, but we may have some problems. About the only church that Paul wrote that he wasn't pointing out error or telling them about things that need to be corrected or talking about certain people is Ephesus. The letter to the Ephesians What a different letter than all the others seem to be. But by and large, churches who are trying to do right are dealing with problems. Families that are growing have problems. Yes, sir.
In reference to Diotrephes and this particular letter, I think gives us an insight into what lies ahead for the church, particularly as the apostles, those who had authority from Christ himself. Already you see individuals in this one particular case, and this person, and I think he's probably representative of maybe other areas or other churches that, because remember, there's a lot of churches established, they're trying to visit all these different churches. But I think he gives us a view into the future when, as we can look back now and see exactly what has taken place. You have individuals who rise to positions of power or authority in the church, either by their own means or a group who support them. And that's how we ended up with the idea of the universal church or the Catholic Church. And then we see from there where for a while you had 2 or 3 different individuals calling themselves popes who were battling. Physically, they had armies.
Yeah.
And but you can see what's coming is, and I think the lesson to us is that when you allow just the door to crack open to allow, whether it is a false teacher, in this case it would be a false teacher, to take root into your individual church, and you start granting them fellowship and acceptance, you become a part of that rebellion. And we look at Christendom around the world today, and I forget the last count of how many different, at least what the Wikipedia, whatever, refers to as different Christian denominations.
Yes.
Are the names of different churches who claim to be Christian churches. And they're enormous.
Yeah.
And, but they all began with maybe not a Diotrephes, but someone who had an idea that he had a direct revelation, whether it was Joseph Smith or whether it was a number of other individuals who started a particular movement, and people began to follow them because of their charisma or because they liked what this person was saying. I read, and I assume this quote is correct, it was attributed to Joel Osteen, that he would never preach on sin or hell or basically anything negative, because people didn't need to hear that. They came to be encouraged, to be lifted up, to so on and so forth. In other words, he is appealing to people with itching ears who just want to go and leave feeling really good about themselves. He's a great motivational speaker, but he's certainly not one who preaches in spirit and truth. And there are many others like that. And it's amazing because people, once they depart from the Scripture, as these were departing from the apostles, and the apostles were having to be in and correcting them, you already had opposition toward them. Now we have opposition toward His Word. and we see what chaos and division that's created.
It always was a wonder to me as I was growing up and read in the Old Testament, and it was a scary thing that while the Israelites were traveling in the wilderness, that the law was, if you knew your brother, somebody among the Israelites, did something that was sinful, and you didn't point it out, bring it to the attention of others, bring it out in the open, you were guilty of it too. I remember thinking, that ain't fair. That doesn't seem right. I get it now. Wish we felt more like that in the church, that we would point out to our brothers, let's talk about this, because one of us has misunderstood this, and maybe both of us. Yes, ma'am?
That's what I said, or Pastor said that, get in there and brother, show his way, that way you cover up a multitude of sins. I know I said that wrong, but.
Even those that hadn't come up yet, you can cover them up before they get started. That goes back to this fellowship. You have to have this fellowship in order to know one another and to be able to encourage one another and to have the kind of affection for one another that you can go to another one and say, I love you, you know I love you. But I don't understand this that I've heard or seen you doing. Can we talk about this? Maybe we need to have classes in that. I've never studied to be a nurse, but I understand, and I believe it, that nurses go through assertiveness training. You ever had a nurse come in to your hospital room and want to give you medicine? You say, I don't want it. Buddy, you done said the wrong thing now, because you're about to get that. They'll get loud and stern, and I mean, you'd rather eat broken glass than have her come after you again. We need to figure out how to get past objections, get past embarrassment, get past uncomfortableness, because ain't nothing here as uncomfortable as get out of my sight, I don't want to ever see you again, coming from God. My time is up. I thank you for yours.